Hello, welcome to this new online format of Talking Galleries. Thanks for joining us in a new series of panels about gallery practices and the art market. We want to understand the consequences of the pandemic in this industry and the digital challenges we are facing today. As a think tank devoted to generating debate and knowledge, last week we had some very interesting sessions in Spanish, and today we are beginning the English program. We expect our panelists to analyze the market's current situation and inspire and help us visualize where we are going in the next month. I would like to thank all the panelists that are participating in these sessions and all the attendees that are joining us on this new format from home or the office. I would like to remind you that in a few days, all sessions will be uploaded on our website and will be accessible to everybody. Right, so let's go directly to today's panel, Digital Solutions in the Face of Covid-19. We have some first-class experts, Sam Orlofsky, Director at Gagosian Gallery in New York, Marina Ruiz, Head of Contemporary Day Sale at Sotheby's in London, and Elena Soboleva, Director of Online Sales at David Zwirner in New York. And a top moderator, Jane Morris, Editor-at-Large at the Young Newspaper in London. I hope you all find the session interesting and profitable. Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lucia. And I should also say, as well as being the editor of the art newspaper, I'm also an editor-at-large of the art newspaper. I'm also an editor-at-large at Cultureshock. Thank you very much, Lucia. So the last time we talked about this subject, well, me and Elena, we were in Barcelona and it was in January. And I think at that point, we didn't really realize how serious the outbreak of what turned out to be coronavirus in Wuhan was going to turn out to be. That session was called Selling Art Online, Are Galleries Prepared? And I think from memory, Elena, I think we sort of were talking more about it in the context of millennial collectors. Would it appeal to new buyers? I think you said at the time, 40% of the people who were coming to you at Zwirner online were new people to you. But of course, by the middle of March, a couple of months later, everything had changed completely. And pretty much the only way to sell either was online or by sending pictures to collectors, picking up the phone and talking to them. But obviously, the art fairs had gone, the galleries were closed, people couldn't come and see you in person. So I think that we didn't really quite realize how prescient that talk was. Now, in this session, we're going to look at the way these three businesses, Zwirner, Sotheby's and Gagosian, have coped during the lockdown and how they've pivoted their businesses even further into the online space. Lucia introduced everybody, but I thought I might just give a little bit more background about each of you for context for our audience. And I think we've got a few hundred people attending, which is great. Sam, you're leading online development, but with Alison MacDonald, who's Director of Publications, aren't you, at Gagosian? You've worked in the gallery for what, about 15 years?
Oh, 20.
20
well,
years.
April of 2001. So
yeah, that's 20 years. Near enough, nearest, damn it. And you actually worked, I mean, although you're working a lot on online now, you've actually spent a lot of your career working as a sales director in the bricks and mortar galleries and also as an artist liaison, working closely with a lot of artists. So that's your kind of experience. Elena, you joined David Zwirner in 2018 as online sales director, and you were actually brought on board specifically to grow the business, weren't you? Because the year before, there'd been some experimentation at the gallery with online viewing rooms. You were an early team member at Artsy, which I think, Sam, you have also had some involvement in as an advisor. You were an early team member at Artsy when it was in beta, and you've worked there in sales, editorial, and on sort of curatorial projects. And then finally, Marina, you're the head of the Contemporary Day Sale in Sotheby's in London, and you've obviously had to pivot really quickly to online. And you're going to talk about that, but also Sotheby's has done a massive project. I mean, far more than we could talk about because they've got wine sales and they've got watches sales and jewelry and all sorts of things. But you're going to tell us really what's been happening in the contemporary art department and also talk about the new Sotheby's Gallery Network. Okay. I suppose what I'm sort of very interested in is the fact that there's been a few reports about, you know, the situation with online selling. I think some of you might have seen the Hiscox report produced by Art Tactic that came out in July. The most recent one, I think, was just 10 days ago, the Art Basel UBS report that Claire McAndrew produced. And it's made it pretty clear that the lockdown has, you know, obviously, like for most businesses, has been a very difficult time for galleries. Online sales, sales have fallen at a lot of the galleries. I think she said between 46% for the smaller galleries, maybe 35% for the larger galleries. Art Tactic had sales at the big auction houses down by 50% in the first 6 months of the year. But she also found that online sales have increased dramatically. So from maybe 5 or 10% of revenue to almost 40% of revenue in some cases. Having said that, I was on the phone a few days ago to one of the heads of one of New York's biggest galleries, and he said on a scale of 1 to 10, for him, online selling was a 3. So I really wondered how important online selling has been for your businesses. And I wondered if I could start with you, Sam.
Sure. Well, so in light of the numbers that have been thrown around, which is anywhere from, 20, 30 to even as much as 70%, you read in certain places in terms of sales being down. Fortunately, in our case, it's, nowhere near as extreme as that. That said, our online sales year to date are up 800%. Wow. And you can sort of extrapolate from there based on knowing some of the sales we've made in previous years, in terms of high water marks with the Cecily Brown and some of the other public prices. You can kind of start to extrapolate what those numbers might accumulate to from there. For us, though, it is less necessarily about transactions as it is making sure that business in every sense continues as regularly as possible. And for us, that starts with the artists and the exhibitions. So at a time when many artists who had shows scheduled, all of a sudden were thrown into a great state of uncertainty. For us, being able to use our various media channels and also have experience with online selling allowed us to create a menu of options to go to the artists with and let them know we were still thinking about all of their needs, all of their concerns, and work together and brainstorm with them to, keep them feeling as comfortable and as safe as possible. So it was obviously massively important and valuable, A, to continue generating revenue, but B, to let the artists know we've looked out for them and have a long-term strategy to keep things as close to normal as possible.
Was that the same for you, Elena, at David Zwirner?
Well, I certainly would agree with Sam and the fact that we were, very well positioned. And for us, really, from, as you mentioned, 2017, that was a critical pillar of the gallery and really a space that we developed. And what we saw and were very quickly able to do when the lockdown happened is really pivot and lean into all of the online sales that were already happening. And I'd say there was sort of 3 main parts to having that be a real success for us, and certainly ensure that the gallery was continuing and having a strong season. Launching multiple series was really a key component of that. We had online viewing rooms already, and through the spring when COVID hit, we realized that we really need to create multiple channels and multiple ways to speak with our audience. And so what we started doing is actually understanding the different segments and starting to launch series like Studio, Exceptional Works, platforms, offsite. I know we'll get to talk a little bit more about that.
We will talk about those in more detail. Yeah,
exactly. Second of all, we just had the right team in place. And I think there's sort of no understatement that I could say about having the right people who are so driven by the mission and can work together to make that happen. And we went from having about 2 online viewing rooms a month, which was on par with our art fairs participation, to having 12 a month during the peak season. And you could not have done that with not having sort of an amazing team that really works together and really sort of tackles all of these problems and challenges in sort of a very unique way. And then, of course, we had our artists involved. And truly, it was a collaboration and partnership, and many of the projects we did were driven by them. And through all that, we really saw, as I mentioned, sort of a huge success and a huge increase in, you know, online sales, both in terms of the average price point shooting way up, in terms of the value, in terms of the audiences, and I know we'll get to talk about all that.
Okay, so very important from your perspective as well. Marina, you obviously have the advantage of public figures, if people could do the adding up.
Yes.
Perhaps you could give us a picture of what was happening with you, because, I mean, I think you had experimented with some online day sales, is that correct? But,
not day sales, but yes, online sales.
Okay, but this was okay. So it was the first time that you had to pivot the day sales. How did it go, and how did you manage it this quickly?
So similar to what Elena was saying, we had done some work already, and online was definitely a thing that we had been looking into. We had started doing online sales back in 2016. They were smaller format, but we did have the know-how of how to put one of these sales together. For us, what online has meant was to just keep being able to do what we do. It was either we pivoted our auctions into online sales, or we just didn't have an auction, which for us was not an option. So because we already had the technology, we already had the how do we put a sale together, we extrapolated that into our bigger sales. And in terms of contemporary, the first sale that we literally had to turn into an online sale in the course of 2 weeks was our contemporary curated sale, which happened on the 21st of April. That had been scheduled to be a live sale, and it had to be transformed into an online sale because there was no option of being in the building. No one could come to the building to see the art. So it was just a transformation of the catalog, of how we were going to sell the sale. But it just meant that we could do the sale, and it was a huge success. From a low estimate of £3.4 million, we made 5.1 with 96% sold in terms of value, which is huge for an online sale where we were used to doing around 500,000 in sales. To go to 5 million, that was enormous. And obviously, for anyone who's been following what we have been doing this year, online sales have become the norm, not only in contemporary, which is easier to understand, but in every single category. We've done online sales in old masters, books, wine, jewelry, all sorts of categories. And we've also expanded our private sales business into the online model, which has been super exciting.
Yes, and I think some figures that I was working on with a colleague for an article, that in lockdown, so over the period from the middle of March to, let's say, the end of July, your online sales, now this does include wine and watches and things, went from about $30 million to $266 million. So I think...
So to give you more up-to-date figures, up until now, our total online sales is $326 million versus 80 million in 2019.
Okay, so it's a really big change. And I'm guessing that you did actually have to re-clear all those consignments because the consigners gave them on the basis it was a live sale.
Exactly. So with the sales that have happened later in the year, it's been easier because we went into those sales knowing that they were going to be online. But for the curated sale, we literally had to recontract the whole sale in 2 days.
Now, I'm glad I wasn't in your shoes doing it, but well done. I suppose my other sort of question is going back a bit, but you guys all are working for businesses that have been earlier adopters than a lot of galleries. And I just wondered how briefly you've managed to make that organizational change happen, because we know that people weren't selling very much online. I mean, a lot of figures are saying we're only maybe 5 to 10% of gallery sales were coming this way. Even Sotheby's was under 5% of its total turnover last year. And you don't know what the reaction is going to be till you try. So you don't know what the artist's reaction is going to be, or the consignor's reaction is going to be. So presumably quite a lot of the initial resistance has come internally. Sam, I wonder if you could talk a bit on that.
Sure. So fortunately, I work for someone who's always thinking about how to do more business and grow his business as much as possible. So there's luckily the least amount of resistance when it comes to the person who has to actually ultimately sign off and authorize new initiatives.
Is the owner.
Larry, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I had been, my journey to get to this point also, I think, reassured him in a lot of regards that, I could be trusted to kind of manage this, which is to say I had also helped a lot with our brick and mortar expansion. I had been traveling a lot, and, when we opened in Rome, when we opened in Paris, when we had a temporary space in Moscow, when we opened in Hong Kong, I had done a lot of the on the ground looking at the spaces. Because I work with so many artists, the most important thing is that the artists want to show in the space. Space, opening in a new city doesn't do you any good if the artists don't want to have shows there. So I think Larry always felt comfortable that I could view things through the prism of what an artist would feel comfortable with. And so then when we combine that track record with the experience I'd had working on Artsy, working as an advisor on Artsy and as an early investor in Artsy, when Larry would say, why aren't we doing more online sales? What's going on with Artsy? He would ask this sort of variety of questions. At a certain point, it just became obvious that one thing to do was to try it ourselves. In other words, instead of relying on Artsy or being frustrated by Artsy, Artsy's made a lot of great accomplishments, but there were definitely things I had hoped they would try that they didn't, or things I would hope they would prioritize that they didn't. And we had the advantage of, being able to directly persuade artists to do something under our brand umbrella. And that's why it's so important to, continue to mention Alison McDonald, who's our director of publications, as a partner, because she and I had so much experience together working on publications, working on catalogs, working on advertisements, working on everything that the gallery puts out on behalf of the artists. So we had a sort of common, we had a mutual respect and a comfort level that we both knew how to protect the artist's vision, and that we would only pursue things that we felt that the artist would be comfortable with and proud of, and would still make them look good and make the gallery look good. So just to answer the question about institutional change, luckily most of the other people at the gallery weren't that focused on this. Everyone's working as hard as they can to do what they're already doing, which is, sell as much art as possible in most cases. So there was a sort of wide open playing field. And there definitely were some skeptics. Basically, I was nodding when Marina was talking about the consignments, when you guys talked about having to renegotiate the consignments, because in our case, the artists, we do a ton of secondary market business as well. So we have experience with those kinds of consigners, but the majority of our consignments are from the artists themselves. They're our consigners. So we have to persuade them, or they have to feel comfortable in trusting this work to us, whether we're taking it to an art fair, whether we're showing it in an exhibition in one of our brick and mortar spaces, or whether we're putting it online for sale. So I think a lot of the smaller galleries that we're going to talk about later, and even a lot of my colleagues, just went to a default assumption that the artists wouldn't feel comfortable with this. They were pessimistic. They were saying, "Oh, the artists tend to be conservative. They're not going to want to do this." And I didn't feel that way. I felt that, like with any good relationship, if you communicate and you share as much information as you can up front, and you enter into an open brainstorm and dialogue, if you can help someone see that this is good for them and can be good for them, and that there's very little downside, it'll work out. And so again, a lot of the people who were pessimistic maybe just sort of they didn't feel the need to really get in the way. And Alison and I designed some things we were really confident in, and then it was about going to the artists and sharing that with them, and 99% of the time they were really thrilled with it and have been happy to participate, as have been the consigners of secondary market material.
For Elena, was it the same at David Zwirner in that did you have the buy-in of David Zwirner right from the beginning? Because obviously it's a huge advantage at Gagosian. I'm guessing if Larry wants something, Larry gets it. So was it like that at David Zwirner, or did you have to persuade him, or did somebody else have to persuade him? How did that work, Elena?
I mean, David had the vision long ago, and clearly the fact that he hired me and established this team and built out the online viewing room before anyone else in the industry was, really shows how much he was interested in the space, thinking about the space, and really sort of seeing that as a future, real shoulder-to-shoulder pillar of the gallery program. So I think that there was no convincing needed once I got there, which was very lucky, and really having the full support of all the partners and the gallery there was critical to sort of the success in building the team. And much more sort of importantly, of course, is the buy-in of the artists, which Sam rightly mentioned. And what was really exciting and probably different from the last time we spoke, in many ways, it was not just us approaching artists with a concept and a way to sort of, show their work and obviously generate revenue for the gallery, but artists actually coming to us, artists whose work I have admired so much, coming to us with ideas. And so many of the series that started to form and that we were able to sort of implement in the last 6 months really came from the artists driving those initiatives. And I think that's important because when the gallery was shut down, not only was the commercial arm shut down, it was also our value as a cultural sort of beacon, as a way that we brought culture to our larger audience. And through that, we continue to be able to do that through obviously the podcast, through the amazing sort of content and everything that was happening. We had shows that some of which were non-selling, such as the Josh Smith offsite, where Josh actually came to us with this idea that he's gonna mount a show on his own rooftop and really wanted to engage our audience in a much more sort of critical and experimental approach, and that was really exciting and vastly different, and shows how not only when this flywheel starts going, not only is it the gallery driving that, but the artists themselves.
How's it been at Sotheby's? Because Sotheby's, the previous ownership, I believe, did invest a lot, did they not? Particularly in I think a bespoke platform rather than using a bought-in one. So even the previous owners were very keen on this, and we know from the pronouncements of Patrick Drahi that this was a stated aim, but it did seem to ramp up incredibly quickly.
Yes, so as you've mentioned, the previous leadership was very keen on us expanding in this area, and there were some investments made, and the platform was being developed, and Patrick and his team are super keen to keep us doing what we had been preparing to do. So this investment and this attention to the online world and the kind of technology, how we can develop, how we can keep being an innovative player in the industry, which being an auction house that's over 200 years old is something that we pride ourselves in. It has been so key, and it has allowed us to investigate, to be creative, and to do things slightly differently. It has been very fun. There has been some initial resistance, yes, just because when you don't know how a product is going to be, as Sam was saying, you just have to communicate. You have to tell your client, be it an internal client, your colleague who doesn't necessarily know how the catalog is going to look like, to the client they are trying to convince to consign to the sale, that their work is going to be as well treated and as well taken care of as any other, if they consign to a live sale. So yes, there has been a little bit of explaining to do, but I think with any change that is to be expected. You have to say, okay, we don't have your physical catalog, but you do have this amazing augmented reality option in the catalog that allows you to see the artwork hung on your wall at home that you didn't have before. Or, we have these enhanced catalogs. I remember when we had the presentation from the team in New York who had been developing the catalog, and you kept hearing about the catalog, and no one here in London had heard of it before. And when they came over and presented it to us, I mean, it was like a playground. You could basically do whatever you wanted with the catalog. You can add these timelines and illustrate different events in the artwork's history or in the artist's history that are important and relevant to this particular artwork. You can embed videos in the lot page. You can do so many things that we weren't able to do before and that you cannot do in a physical catalog. So, it has been definitely a learning process, but it's been super fun.
I mean, the thing about content is very interesting, isn't it? Because I think that, without meaning this in any way rudely, the day sale has always been treated as the poor relation of the evening sales, and the evening sales get these enormous catalogues, and huge adverts in the art press. And I suppose finally, the plus for you was that finally you could, in the digital space, give people some surrounding content that wouldn't have been allowed in the past.
100%. And even, with the videos that I just mentioned, before, the day sale would have never had videos. Whereas now we actually are able to produce these videos, to produce editorials. We worked so much closer with the marketing team, with our editorial team, which is all these new teams that are being created and that we work with so closely now, because we come up with a strategy. How are we going to present this work better in our website? And as a day sale, let's say someone finds this really cool picture of the work being made by the artist. Before, because the catalog is real estate, you maybe couldn't illustrate this picture. Now on the website, you can illustrate this picture and as many others as you want.
I suppose this would be a good time to talk a little bit about what you actually did. Or Sam, did you want to just say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, I don't know if this is the correct use of the old saying, the medium is the message, but you design and develop the material or the assets for the channel you're going to most lean upon. And, in our case, for example, we have several million social media followers, over 1 million followers on Instagram. So whereas if you're designing a traditional exhibition catalog, you're imagining somebody holding something in their hands and maybe taking the time to read a text of a certain length. If we know that the primary channel we're going to be relying on is Instagram, we design and develop something totally, relatively different that could still be just as successful. And so I do think realizing that you have these new additional alternative channels for distributing the message about the work is really an important thing to recognize and embrace.
Absolutely.
I'd want to add something too, if that's okay, Jane.
Sure. Although I think we do need to explain to people what you've done so they've got a little bit of context. But yes, carry on, Elena.
Just to the point that I think was just mentioned, I think that also what's really new in the last 6 months is that because we've all been in lockdown, there's sort of been more authentic content. And I want to say that, one of the things that I found quite radical in some ways is that our content team has started using Zoom videos. We started using all the photography recorded by our artists, which is this amazing trove of material that before just would have never entered the public stream. And now, what we're able to have is a conversation with Carrie James Marshall talking about, race relations in America. That's a Zoom conversation that feels so intimate and so close. And in that way, I think that, to the point of the medium being the message, it's really specifically for this channel, and really specifically something that you couldn't do through a print catalog or a traditional book publication.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that perhaps this is a good time, though, just to explain what you've done. So, Elena, could you just give us a little quick rundown of, you've basically gone for a sort of set of strands of online exhibitions. So perhaps you could just give a little outline of the main strands in case people aren't up to speed on these.
Of course. I mean, when we launched, we launched 28 exhibitions from March until August, and so with that, they fell under these various series, and 4 of which were launched under lockdown. So platform was something that I think we will talk about together, but was the first series we launched about 2 weeks after we went into, all the galleries closed. And it was a way for us to really be able to share our resources and help other galleries. But the two that I think are relevant in terms of our own sales are Studio, which is a solo presentation where we focus on a different artist from our program and really showcased what they have been doing in whatever space they were in, really understanding their practice and allowing them to have that sort of both intimate presentation of their work, but as well all the context that accompanies that. And for Studio, I mean, since many of the prices were shared, I'm happy to share some data with you there, is that we actually had over $17 million worth of sales just for one series. There's 5 other series. So this gives you, again, a little bit of a sense of, the kind of sales that were happening, but really including a highlight piece by Jeff Koons, which was, for me, a career highlight to work on. It was a Venus Lespugue in red that was the process of many years of making. And the fact that, never before would have such a work been brought online, but in this unique moment, we were able to premiere that piece and tell the rich story of how it was made through the online channel and through the Studio format specifically.
So the Studio format is very much fresh works from the studio. Yeah.
Exactly. And so with that, we really invite the artists to participate and give us, the story, the narrative behind the work, because while we all know that it's still such a stronger experience to see the work in the flesh and to really be there in person, online is so well positioned to really storytell through that. And so we had materials which, Jeff had never shared before, everything from CT scans of the balloons he was tying to, drawings that he did to, all the process of the fabrication up to the spring, which is when the work was done, online for audiences to see. And much like that, when we did the Carrie James Marshall, he was able to premiere a whole new series and really tell the narrative about that. And so that's one example of the series we launched. On the other end, we launched Exceptional Works. And I want to mention that because actually most of the audiences will not be familiar with that because it was a private invite-only initiative. So we launched that to our active collectors. And that was a way for us to basically sort of simulate what we would do in a private viewing room. And there we were able to bring works with, canonical sort of masterpieces with exceptional provenance. We launched it with a Joseph Albers that was an homage to the square that sold for 1.8 million. That came from the collection of Theodore Dreyer, who was the co-founder of Black Mountain College. The following pieces included Morandi and Ruth Asawa. So really focusing on the secondary market, focusing on really works that are, would be something that would be very special, would be shown potentially at major fairs like Basel or in the back rooms, now being brought online with really rigorous academic research.
And that was obviously a way of doing secondary market selling online. And quite discreetly, but giving an awful lot of content, again, films and history and so forth around it. Sam, you became, I think, very well known for this amazing Albert Oilen online viewing room sale that you did. I think, was it Art Basel Hong Kong 2019 from memory?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And a lot of people felt that was a kind of watershed moment, I guess. So obviously we don't know what it sold for, but I think it was priced around $6 million. And again, you had very interesting content around it, including market videos and so forth. But you went and did something quite different or sort of different during the lockdown. Went from different tack, and you launched this series called Artist Spotlight. And I wondered if you could explain to us what the difference was and why you went down that line.
Mm-hmm. So the Albert Oilen, and then exactly a year later, there was a Cecily Brown. Those were each single lot, standalone online viewing rooms that were a new variation within our overall online viewing room program, which had been a sort of satellite or parallel experience timed to bricks and mortar art fairs. So each time there was a major international art fair, the idea was to create a destination where collectors who couldn't physically be present could go and have a much easier time getting access to all the information, including price, that they needed, and have a shorter path to making an acquisition. In other words, maybe you're in New York, but the fair is in Basel, and you're having trouble getting the attention of your salesperson because they're actually standing in the booth that day and they're dealing with actual live humans, and you kind of can't get a price out of them or a straight answer. We wanted to make a place where collectors could go on their own and have every single piece of information they needed to, click and make an acquisition. And so as we had tried to set cross new thresholds in terms of price, we, right off the bat, the first time we ever did it, we sold a painting for $1 million, which at the time, again, which was a relatively unprecedented threshold across with online sales. We kept trying to hit higher and higher marks. And so the Erlin, which we had been asking $6 million for, we put we put together all that information because we figured that's what it would require to get a consigner to give it to us rather than an auction house. We basically took the auction house playbook and said, give this to us and we'll basically give you a standalone sale, evening lot, catalog one, cover, treatment. And it worked. When it came to what to do when our brick and mortar galleries started closing, the question was, how do we treat those exhibitions as though they are still more important than anything else? In other words, we didn't want to migrate shows online because we don't think, no matter how well you do that, it's not the same as taking advantage of the beautiful physical spaces we have all over the world. So we knew the artists had developed these exhibitions with these specific spaces in mind. And in certain cases, they'd only had the show open for a couple weeks, or in other cases, they were being postponed indefinitely. So Artist Spotlight was a way of bringing as much attention as possible to an individual artist, one at a time, for a week at a time, without it cannibalizing the integrity of their actual physical exhibition. So it was about trying to sell a single artwork, either from the show or related to the show, but be, as we were discussing before, be medium specific, be an experience someone could have on their iPad, on their phone, where it was a lot of easily accessible, digestible content, and it would be promotional and it would keep things warm for the artist, but by no means take the place of the ultimate exhibition by the artist. And again, I think, with the artists being our business partners and our consigners, it's important to reassure them that we still think the show is the most important thing, but we're adding an additional alternate means of introducing their work to the largest audience possible and still generating as much business as possible.
I think what's interesting as well, though, you did create a sort of sense of time pressure around it, didn't you? Because the Artist Spotlight, it was, I think the strap line was something like one artist, 1 week, one work, something like that. But
yeah, they were primary. The important distinction I think I could have started with is that it's exclusively primary market work. So again, it's a new work or a work that was recently completed by the artist for sale for 48 hours with a price on it. And that, again, is meant to create some amalgam of the urgency people feel the day before the opening when they're previewing a show that they know is very sought after, the experience they might have at an auction, and the experience they might have on the opening day of an art fair. And those are, I think we can all agree, no matter where we're coming from, those are the three environments most conducive to selling. So we thought if we could sort of create some synthesis of those three selling environments, we would be likely to succeed.
And I think, Marina, obviously you mentioned auction, you are in an auction house, but I think you've also created new formats for the same reason, haven't you? Which is these, I'm thinking particularly of this contemporary showcase series, which maybe you could tell us a little bit about that and how it's, I think most of us, when we think of an auction, we think obviously 200 lots, one night, it's all hammered down, then it's gone. So
yeah, So these contemporary showcase, I will just talk briefly about online in general. Obviously, we're used to the auction seasons being in London, February, June, October, in New York, May, November. So there's this very set calendar. But what we discovered with online is you can basically have an auction whenever you want, because there's no time. You can have an auction every single week if you want, which we are doing in some departments. In another thing that we have discovered and that we see with the kind of how auctions track is that very big auctions, so those 400 lot or 500 lot auctions, sometimes become a bit heavy for our audience. So, to keep someone scrolling down 500 lot, that is a lot. And you can't expect your clients to keep doing that. So we did have to modify, and you will have seen that some of our sales, actually the day sales, for example, they are slightly smaller, because we do also take into account that our clients will get tired of scrolling down a screen. So these contemporary showcase series is a little bit of both, where you can have auctions whenever you want out of the seasons. You can have them be about a specific theme, which also helps curate a little bit with like the masterpieces, or these single item sales. You have this very reduced amount of lots. You have a theme that helps them be put together, and that was a really successful series of 6 auctions that we did in Hong Kong, each of them around a different theme. One of them was around manga. I think we all got requests from people we had never met, and they were all asking about these manga items that we were selling in Hong Kong. So they were incredibly successful. We are thinking about maybe continuing them. Online is definitely something that's here to stay. So yeah, we might be still doing them next year.
And some of these sales are really short, aren't they? They might just be 15 things and it turns over quickly. It's a week.
Exactly.
And then the next one comes along, and I gather that you've been getting repeat buyers, through these sales. 15 next week, the next 15.
Repeat and completely new, which has been amazing. I think Elena mentioned earlier that you had around 40% of new buyers. We have had 30% of buyers which are new to us through these online sales, and it has been amazing being able to do something like the sale of the sneakers, the Michael Jordan sneakers that we did. We would have never thought of selling sneakers in the past, but right now we are catering and we are adapting what we offer to the audiences that we have, and
that was literally one object, wasn't it? You literally sold one object, and what was the price? It was like $600,000 or something.
They made $560,000, which is amazing. And we've had other examples, with our prints department, who have seen how well all their Banksy prints have been doing. Well, they created a Banksy sale that is done twice a year. We just had one last week. I think they made £2 million off an estimate of $500,000. So they are incredibly successful. And we have this really exciting sale coming up in New York called Dear Keith, where we are selling the contents of Keith Haring's personal collection, which will benefit the center in New York. And it's this charity auction, which is something that we have done in the past in our live sales, and we usually put them as part of the sale. You can make them their own event. And, with the online platform, because there's no pressure of putting it in one season or within one sale, and you have to be careful, you can literally do whatever you want, which is great.
I mean, the medium is the message is a very good point that you made earlier, Sam. And of course, one of the great advantages of digital is that you can look at people's behavior. You can look at user behavior. People are using it in retail all the time. People are using it now in the media, particularly the bigger, wealthier platforms. I wondered, this question to all of you, how much are you using analytics and looking at buyer behavior and moderating how, or altering how you present things in the light of that. Marina, perhaps that's, I'm sure it's something you're doing at Sotheby's.
Yeah, so when obviously after every sale, we always analyze our buyers and bidders' behaviors, and we have been experimenting, for example, with the length of the online sales. So, for example, you'd start having them for 10 days. That sometimes is a bit too long. It varies by department also. In contemporary, we see a lot of the activity happens in the first day and then in the last day. So sometimes it is pointless to have 10 days when you know that nothing is going to happen in the middle. So then we shorten that kind of that period where the sale is open, and now it's usually around 7 days. We also have seen how certain things do better. So more commercial, colorful works definitely help a sale. There are specific works that aren't suited for online auction. So some installations, some things just don't do as well. So we definitely track things like that. Yes.
I mean, is that really an option, though, for you, Elena and Sam? I mean, if you've got an artist who produces dark, gloomy works that don't look good on Instagram, you're still representing them. So, so how are you dealing with, I mean, are you choosing to put on things that are more exhibition friendly? How are you, if you know that the buyers just won't respond to something online, do you do it anyway?
Well, I mean, sorry, I'll jump in, but just to say that I think that our role is to really give the artists the freedom to, do what they want, and our goal is to really showcase it in the best light. Now, of course, we have to be creative and understand what that is, and sometimes there's works that are more subtle that really require much more research and building the narrative in different ways through art historical, through sort of, video, through other versus others are really graphic and immediately. And so I think, to that point, our role as a gallery is really just to support our artists and estates. But coming back to the, point of analytics and looking at demographics of the audience, I think there are some wide trends, and obviously geography was really interesting. And up to the point of COVID, our largest sales were going internationally. Now is actually completely not the case because, of course, everyone is buying online. It's really been valuable to start to create these series because we know, for example, that the studio series I mentioned earlier has, a very high, actually above 50% of collectors inquiring are new to the gallery versus, of course, something like Exceptional Works, which is this private invite only, would have a very low percentage of new clients since we know the people we're sending this to. But on the other hand, I kind of want to warn also, as everything online is iterative, but there's also sort of a fallacy here that you can fall into wherein you think that it's controlled. And until you can actually control the variables and really know what you're isolating and testing, each artist is unique, each series that or body of work they produce is unique. And so you can't really, within a gallery setting, I think, take things and apply them en masse. So, I think that's where you need to recognize where there's sort of, you can iterate and of course continue to constantly get better and create feedback loops, and where it's really specific to the artist.
But and I would elaborate on that by saying that at Gagosian in particular, we're at the teeny top tip of the iceberg with this in terms of actual percentage of material that comes through the gallery that goes online. And so again, the two groups of consigners are the artists themselves and our clients who are giving us secondary market work. In order to convince those consigners to give us work to sell, we have to be able to put our money where our mouth is. We want the things to sell. So we're mostly only putting online for sale things we're really confident are going to sell, because we want the artists and the consigners to trust us and continue giving us things to sell. So there's not yet been some grand experiment in terms of, putting hundreds and thousands of pieces of inventory online, and then sort of just letting the chips fall where they may and looking for trends and looking for, patterns within that. We're not even anywhere close to that yet. We're still much more, we're barely we're looking at results, and so there's information there. But in terms of analyzing data, like we're not even in really people are going to be disappointed to hear this. They would assume Gagosian would be at the cutting edge of this, but we're not really even in a position to capture that stuff yet. We're a ways away. And so what we can see is engagement. And that's why I go back to us, it being largely a media story more than a technology story, which is that we have these channels for sharing our message. And, we can see which artists get more clicks. We can see which artists people will stay longer with a video, sort of studio visit kind of video about all that kind of stuff. And we feel really good and really confident that we know what we're doing there. And so in the short term, we're putting our eggs more actually in those baskets than we are in any data analytics, tech, back end kind of basket.
And it should be said that all three galleries, and I'm going to go to Marina, all three, also not two galleries and auction house, you have all invested a lot in content. Now, obviously, I'm in content business being a journalist. I mean, it is hard to cut through. So I'm really wondering what happens if we get very large slews of not so great content. I mean, the audience is fussy. It's not an easy audience. So Marina, I don't know if that's going to speak to what you were asking about, but
yeah. So I was going to just on what Sam was saying. We also track that kind of responses to our content, and we have. I mentioned earlier, we work with our editorial team really closely, and we have meetings before our kind of the websites are officially launched every season, where we sit down and they ask us, right, what is interesting in the sale? And it's not about what is the most expensive thing you have in the sale. It is about what can we say, what stories can we tell, because that is what is going to bring the clicks. And it's not only the editorial team, we sit down with the marketing team, we sit down with the press team who are in charge of our Instagram channel. And it is amazing how, we have evolved the type of content that we put out on Instagram, from the stories that our team put together about the sale, which, it is something that we end up telling our clients, look, your work is so amazing. We think it has a really cool story. We want to put it in on Instagram. And that will definitely drive clicks from the app to the website. And from that to our Instagram lives, we put together this series called the Lunchtime Lives in July, because we saw that our audience want to hear from the specialists. So in a similar, not as cool maybe way, where the galleries are engaging their audience with their artists, and you can hear the artists about their work, you can meet
a specialist.
Which is also fun. But we do have those little bits of information about what makes an artwork special. And something as silly. I remember I mentioned the back of Joseph Albers, which to me is one of the most special and most interesting parts of that painting. And I was talking about, how he puts all the different colors, and that all of a sudden became a thing where people were like, oh my God, this is so interesting. We didn't know about this. And it is engaging your audience, because not everyone might know this information, and it is telling these stories which will be interesting to your potential buyers.
I mean, it certainly sounds like you're having to work. I mean, I've never worked inside a gallery, so tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that you are having to work in quite a different way, though, aren't you? You're making these teams that, maybe Elena, this is something you'd like to speak about, but you're making these teams where you're working with content people, you're working with marketing, you're working with press, you've got to be able to edit video, etc.
I just want to point out, just to the last question, I have a slightly different probably point of view on that, because while I do agree that engagement is a key metric, I don't feel like the pursuit that we're taking is getting clicks, because for us, it's really important to be able to present our artist program across the board and really actually educate the audience. So while more people might know of certain artists, really, we're not just gonna lean into sort of everything that people expect, but really be able to bring out more. And I can, tell you the success, for example, a year ago for us was bringing Raoul de Kaiser, an artist's estate who you would not expect, and doing exceptionally well with that as a sold out project online for Freeze Masters. But to come to the team question, and I think that's very much hand in hand, because the team is so impassioned about all of the artists and estates that we work with. And one of the sort of, in thinking of this talk and what I could really impart on some of the galleries who are right now trying to figure out a new business model is starting to think about the business of having a gallery in a different way. And one of the roles that one is hiring and how resourceful people are, and having sort of an innovative, iterative team is so important. And some of the roles that are new in some sense include having project managers, for example, because when we build 28 projects in the span of a few months, that means that there's some, there's design teams, photography, everything else that has to be speaking to each other. There's deadlines, there's quality assurance tests. And suddenly the role of a project manager, which didn't exist in the gallery framework before, becomes actually very important. But that doesn't have to be a role hired from the outside. And in fact, we're able to get a lot of our amazing team and within the staff to lead the projects and start to almost, how they would for exhibitions, start to take on these roles. As well, for example, inquiry management, another way that our team has sort of evolved in their skill set, because we now have 24-hour inquiry management, which our team oversees, that covers really that if anyone inquires at any period of time, you're immediately able to get a response, because we've seen that that's how collectors really get engaged. And this is outside of the art fair times. This is just generally because we know we have a global audience, and so they expect us to be online. And so again, working with, again, we're fortunate to have the multiple locations, but really understanding and building these teams in place. And then photography, design, content have all been so critical, because as I said, a lot of, all of the photos we're getting from our artists, they're coming from their studio. They're often coming from the iPhone. I mean, we're working with iPhone photos that, and very talented photography people who are able to use Photoshop to get the lighting even, the perspective right, but it's all sort of, in some ways, actually, you don't need a big fancy studio. Right now, everything we've been doing online is between Zoom, iPhone, and really sort of really talented people.
I'd quite like to move on to the whole issue of platforms, because I can see the time is ticking away. And one of the issues I'm sure a lot of people are interested to hear about is this new gallery network that Sotheby's is launching. But I suppose to make this a wider conversation, and obviously, Zwirner, you've also launched a platform with very different business model. Two of you were involved in Artsy. Could you just give me a sense of where you're going with the sort of collaborating with external platforms? And maybe we could start with Marina first, and why Sotheby's has decided to host galleries on its platform. Why do they want to be there? How does it work? What's the sort of commission structure?
So when we decided to launch the gallery network back in April, this was a time where galleries were closed. No one could go into the auction house. So we were thinking in that framework. The thinking behind it was, well, we already have the platform. We have existing relationships with a lot of galleries and dealers. So it was a way for us to keep doing business with these galleries and these dealers. And we also saw that fairs were not happening. It wasn't, at that moment, it wasn't clear whether there would be online viewing rooms or not. So it was a way for us to generate extra revenue. How it works is that the galleries that collaborate with us and that present art in our platform, we take a percentage of the sale. And what it is, or the advantage or the difference that we have versus other platforms is that you can buy now. There is the option to buy the artwork directly from the website up to $150,000. So that was the main kind of thinking behind it. Just fast, easy sale that could go through our platform. From that, what we see as a benefit for the galleries is that they have access to our users, the users who come to our website, who aren't necessarily the same people who are going to go onto the online viewing rooms for the galleries. They could be the same, but we also have other people who come to our website, and also off the back of the sales or the artworks that are available in our website, other sales can happen. So maybe someone is looking at gallery 303, which is on our platform, and they see a lot of artists, a lot of artworks that are great, but they don't see something that they want. They can still inquire and get in touch with someone in the team and buy another artist in the program that is not in our website. So it does open the possibility of buying other artworks.
Sam, could you imagine a scenario where Gagosian goes on the Sotheby's website, or are you trying to drive more and more and more traffic to your own website? Because I noticed at Art Basel, you were very firmly driving people from the front page of the Art Basel online viewing room directly to the Gagosian site. I mean, are you doing what a lot of big media players are doing and trying to move traffic directly to you? Yeah,
it's the latter. I mean, as averse as Elena may be to clicks, I do still think the goal is to have as much traffic and as many eyeballs on the content you're producing as possible. We are trying to have things be less fragmented and less splintered. I find some galleries' current branding strategy really confusing. There's just so many different initiatives and projects. It's like I get a newsletter from them and I don't really know what is what. We're trying to have things be as consolidated and located in one place as possible.
Gagosian,
i.e. the fairs and collecting page of our website. Yeah. We want everything under one umbrella, and we want people to know if I remember sort of hearing about that, or I want to go see what's happening, I want them to be able to go to one place. And I think that's also a way of mitigating against fatigue. I think, as Marina was talking about the endless scroll, I mean, I think all of us are aware of, the fact that art has to be a couple things. It has to be special, and it has to be related to a larger quality experience. There are people who either, as Elena and Zwirner have pointed out, similar to our gallery, we're open to the public for free. It's a public service. People can come in and see amazing shows without having to buy a ticket. And by the same token, we're dealing with some people with the greatest resources and greatest wealth of anyone on earth. And you want both those, everybody at both ends of the spectrum to have a special experience. And the way we're selling art online should be held to the same exact standard.
And that is a big challenge. I mean, I think that I think many people have raised a lot of questions about some of the online viewing rooms in the fairs, for example, where you've got 3,500 works looking quite similar. Zwirner did the same thing, Elena. They also, yes, you did an online viewing room for Basel, but you add your own 15 rooms. You've also created your own platform for galleries. So that's even more people coming to the Zwirner platform. Are you trying to do the same thing? Are you trying to get everything to Team Zwirner?
Well, for us, we've certainly seen our own website drive a majority of inquiries, even during key fair moments. So I certainly think that's evident, and that's because we can present the works in the right sort of richness of context, as well as a much more curated, focused, feature. So, like you say, there's instead of 3,000, 15. That really gives and highlights the work. Now, to speak to the platform, which I am genuinely, it's one of the most exciting things that we've done, I think, in the last 6 months. It really came out of sort of necessity and a very young group within the gallery, and so. We already had the team, we had the resources in place. And when the lockdown happened, I live in New York in the Lower East Side, and there was even these galleries all around. And we knew that, everyone was just unsure. where things were going. And within 2 weeks, we channeled all that sort of energy and resources into putting together the first iteration of Platform, which was Platform New York, with 12 galleries, really those who were sort of friends and neighbors of the team. And it was such a success that subsequently we did 3 other editions in the spring. And, you know, I mean, I think that's a moment where we didn't take any commission. There was no email to sign up. So, you know, everyone could just enter. We really promoted it to our whole collector base. And we were able to genuinely support a lot of amazing younger artists and galleries that we want to make sure that when we come out of this pandemic are still there. And, you know, we saw the traffic numbers as well. In the first weekend, I think we had 20,000 visitors. And that was sort of, you know, great to see all that energy. During the middle, I mean, this was 2 weeks in, April 3rd, into the sort of everything being locked down, and sales happening. And so frankly, we didn't track any sales. You know, galleries got all their inquiries, but of those coming back to us, you know, from the editions of Platform, we know that we sold over $1 million worth of art for these galleries. So we really feel sort of great about that. And then, you know, kind of fast forward to this season, we just announced a few days ago that actually Platform will become sort of a standalone site, platform.art. And the first iteration of that will be hosting artists for Biden. And so that's a extremely exciting project, which, you know, David Zwirner is bringing the platform.art and hosting over 100 artists, you know, most of whom are not from our gallery, onto this platform to support that.
Okay, I think we're very, very near the end. Unlike a live room, we can't actually see who's in it with us. I think, though, we can safely say that there are some younger and mid-sized galleries. Claire McAndrew's report said that I think 3/4 of them wanted to invest in online selling and in content. So if I could just ask super quickly, could you just give them one tip, something that if they were going to invest in this, what would they do, or something that you wish you'd known a couple of years ago? Sam, if you could start.
Yeah, try to be quick, but I think again there's a caution or a pessimism that a certain level of gallerist has, that their artists are showing with them for a certain reason, which is to be put in a certain type of context, and that the more they diverge from the traditional criteria that establish that context, the more they risk losing the faith or losing the trust of those artists. And I would just say, don't make any assumptions that the way things have always been done is the way they need to continue being done. Please try to have an open mind that the best thing you can do on behalf of your artists is have there be a large educated audience about why they're great. You know, learn to tell the story. Learn to tell as many people as possible why the artists are as great as you think they are. And there, you now have technology at your disposal that should make it much easier for you to do that than it's ever been in the past.
Elena, what would you tell a younger gallery to do? I mean, a lot of galleries feel very anxious that if they give away information about price, or if they give away a lot of information, content expertise, that they're kind of giving away the reason people talk to them in the first place.
I mean, on a sort of high level, just this is a moment to radically rethink your business model and sort of the assumptions that are based on that. And to Sam's point, I think, you know, we're in a moment, and I think some galleries assume, okay, I'll go back to how things were once this is over. But the reality is, you know, galleries should be thinking that this is going to be shoulder to shoulder, and that online has to just be a hybrid extension. And so you have to be building a strategy, not for 6 months or a year when, you know, the vaccine comes along, hopefully, but actually just for the future of your gallery. And so, you know, on a high level, I would say that. On a more practical level, as someone who sort of closely watches a lot of technology trend, I'm so excited that there's so many non-coding tools that are out there that, you know, all of these websites and products that we're able to release and launch, I just feel like galleries with a lot of sort of ingenuity and resourcefulness can you know, start and go and get a Squarespace and Shopify and start to do these things as well. So I am actually very inspired and think there's a lot of opportunity. The online sort of equalizes a lot of things.
Marina.
They've kind of said everything that I wanted to say, but my takeaway is essentially online is the future. I would say as Elena said, adapt to it. Think of a long-term strategy where online and the live experience, which is irreplaceable, and we will always love going to see art in person, but make sure that you are creating the type of content or the type of that you are offering things on your online platform that will help your live experience, and that, you know, these things do go together. Build that. And I would also say, make sure that you know what your identity is as a gallery, and do project that and create a online identity for your gallery.
So a version of the world, your world online. Yeah, that's probably a pretty good place to end. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
So, thank Jane, and thank you all for your brilliant participation. I have to say, it has been a very interesting discussion with lots of ideas that I'm sure will be food for thought for many of our audience. We look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Mark Spiegler, Global Director of Art Basel Fairs, will share with us his thoughts on the future of the art fairs. He will be interviewed by Georgina Adam tomorrow at 5 p.m. Central European Time. The session is not to be missed. Thanks, and see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.